I also want to make sure that we're recording today's session so that anyone who can't make it has the opportunity to be able to play it back afterward. So I'm going to ask that the recording begin, and it will be posted after today's session in case anyone would like to participate in another way. They can watch it and see some of the questions being answered there as well. So what I'm going to do after I provide the overview is open up for a question and answer. And the way that's going to work in Zoom is that there's a spot down at the bottom of your screen for Q&A. When you click on that one little box, it will bring up for you a little dialogue that you can type a question into. And a moderator who's located in another room is going to be helping me in saying the questions that are typed into Zoom, and I'll be providing a live answer to them. We'll also be collecting all the questions from all of the forums that we're doing and making those available. And you'll notice that some of them from prior sessions are already posted on our website. So what I'm going to present to you before I open it up for a question and answer is a synopsis of our plan. Our plan is also posted on our website, and I would also encourage anyone who wants the most latest information to continually check our website for updates. And so to provide a little bit of an overview to the process of developing our plan, we used two surveys that were launched on July 10th, one for parents and students, the other for staff. And the data collected from those surveys was used along with guidelines released by the governor. And then after that, we also had 10 focus groups to talk about what parents, students, and staff were looking for in the reopening of school. And collectively, a core team used that to develop the plan that you would see on our website and for which I'm going to be able to provide an overview for you today. And those core team members were 22 staff members from across the district, representative of various groups. We have district leadership team members, we have teachers, secretaries, other staff members from across the district. We wanted to make sure that we were as cross-representative as possible. And that group did a task of taking 2,320 surveys and 273 participants in focus groups and took all of the information gleaned from both of those places and used that along with the guidelines that were provided to us in order to develop the plan we're showing you today. And we started off with some non-negotiables in developing the plan. And some of them were important for us to spell out because all of us had some sort of a notion of what we thought our virtual or return either or to school might look like based on our experience from March till the end of the school year. And so some of the things that might look a little bit different, I would say, don't use that as a model because we're also trying to create something altogether different. So learning would have to follow a daily schedule. We're still subject to a 180-day calendar. And for parents and students who might be joining us, every school operates on 180 days. That's how long our school year is, and that's how long we were creating our reopening plan for. Also, daily and class period attendance was required. You might recall that after our school closure, the attendance looked a little bit different because of an asynchronous model. We'll be moving more to a synchronous model of instruction. And our curriculum would have to be spiral in nature, meaning that we know that there are things that last year we only stuck to the core or essential items. And in order to build on that for new standards, new grade level standards, we might have to revisit some of those topics and ensure that they're a part of the instruction for students as we go into this year. We also knew we wanted to provide a choice and allow change between those choices in 10-week intervals, and that at some point, there's this eventuality that we could have a school closure again. And in the eventuality of a building closing, we wanted to make sure that any course at any point could be 100% virtual. So those were some of the pieces under which the plan was created that we saw as non-negotiable. We also asked for everyone as a part of the planning process, and I would ask all of you now as well, for their flexibility. we knew going into this that things were going to change. And as you can imagine, all throughout this pandemic, we've had things changing on a daily basis, sometimes even sooner than a daily basis. We know that in the process of implementing this plan, guidelines might change, circumstances might change. We have to keep abreast of all of those things and respond to them. And that might mean, as much as we want a firm plan, that there could be times in which changes are inevitable because we need to be responsive. So the major components of the plan that I'm going to review for you right now are the ones that we lifted from the plan. Again, it's just a synopsis of the plan, but the full plan is listed on our website. So to start off with, under that family and community engagement piece, we wanted to make sure that parents and students had a choice and that they could pick between either the hybrid model, which was our in-person model for primarily mornings and an afternoon virtual session, or 100% virtual in our virtual academy. We also know that regardless of the option chosen, our partnerships with families and communities are paramount in order to make them work. We know that those are really key to our success, and they're an integral part of our implementing the plan. We also utilized health and safety protocols that were provided by the CDC, the New York State Department of Health, and also the New York State Education Department. And in creating our plan, we were really lucky to work with the other districts in Capital Region BOCES and also have a strong partnership with the Schenectady County Department of Health. And they've been a partner of ours throughout the course of this planning, and we continue to have regular calls with them as we work to implement it as well. So under the health and safety category, some things that you'll see in our return to school are health checks and screenings for both students and staff on a daily basis. That means that as students arrive, or staff as well, that they will have a health screening, including a temperature check. And that would be the same also for any visitors, contractors, or vendors coming to the building. And any visitors, contractors, or vendors coming to the building would be on an emergency type of basis. We do have our buildings for the next school year, for the time being, closed to any outside groups. And that's purposefully so that we're controlling who's coming into the buildings, especially from a contact tracing perspective. Also, social distancing will be followed, along with face coverings and other personal protective equipment. We're following infection control strategies, and I'll be getting into plumbing and ventilation under facilities in just a little bit, but wanted to make sure I was listing it under health and safety also. And then should someone become symptomatic throughout the course of a day, every school within our district has a location in its building in which we would have a supposed or symptomatic person placed, until which time we could have them referred to another healthcare provider. And then our plan also includes for contact tracing, monitoring, and COVID testing. And I have a separate screen to speak about them too. And so for COVID testing and contact tracing, I know those are items that have been in the news a lot lately. Our plan for both testing and tracing is to have that strong partnership with Schenectady County Department of Public Health. If we have a case in which a student or a staff member is presenting with symptoms of COVID, we would immediately refer them to either their primary care physician, urgent care, or to the Department of Health so that they could be directed for testing. And then likewise for contact tracing, our plan throughout the course of reopening our schools is to really have a tight control over who's coming in and out of our buildings, and then also even the locations within our buildings. So if for some reason there was a positive case, we would immediately work with the Department of Health to do that contact tracing. And in essence, the contact tracing would be completed for them based on the logs that would be kept at each building and down to each and every room. So in our facilities, we have an increased level of cleaning and disinfecting beyond what you would expect during the course of a normal school year. So you'll see in a little bit as we talk about our hybrid or in-person model, you'll notice that it's a reduced schedule. And that reduced schedule is so that there can be an increased level of cleaning and disinfecting happening each and every day in each and every classroom. So at the conclusion of in-person instruction each day, there would be a thorough cleaning and disinfecting of classrooms as well as any common areas. Also, we would be increasing ventilation to each building. Where there's mechanical ventilation, we would have a minimum of a 25% fresh air intake. And any classroom that we're utilizing for students and staff would also be an exterior facing room with windows that open in order to allow for also fresh air or natural air intake. Social distancing will be required. We'll make sure that all of our desks are facing straight forward. They're at least 6 feet spaced apart. In addition, water fountains throughout the building will be reduced and limited only to those necessary in order to provide the right amount of water and hydration for students. Same with toilet stalls. We might be reducing toilet stalls in some buildings, 1, to promote social distancing, but 2, to also make sure that the stalls that are open are being cleaned regularly. We will be doing the same type of cleaning and disinfecting on a daily basis of all of our bathrooms and our common areas, and those things might be things that happen more frequently throughout the day as well. We are still required to do fire drills and lockdown drills, but you'll notice as we go into the school year, they'll look a little bit different. And while we might not do a whole school drill, we might do them by classroom. It's in an effort to be able to promote social distancing while still conducting a drill. So those will look a little bit different, as well as increased signage throughout all of our facilities. And in addition to signs as you're entering the building and on the walls throughout the building, there will even be signage on our floors directing the flow of traffic and the direction and hallways that people should be walking. As far as child nutrition goes, because our schedule is operating on a reduced in-person schedule, it's just the morning, any student coming in person for in-person instruction will leave at the end of the day with a lunch to take home, to have lunch at home before they begin their afternoon of virtual instruction. And it'll also include a breakfast for the next day. So they'll be leaving each day with what they'll need for lunch that day and for their breakfast for the next day. And also anyone participating in our virtual program will also have access at various locations throughout the city to pick up a bagged lunch and a breakfast for the next morning as well. So regardless of what option, whether it's the hybrid option or the completely virtual option, meals will still be provided. If students are needing to use transportation to get to school, and as a part of our questionnaire that went out to families, you'll notice we asked if you were going to be relying on transportation. That was really in an effort to be able to, wherever possible, reduce the use of transportation, but that's because of capacity. We want to make sure that we have a 50% or less capacity. Really, the optimal number would be between 33 and 50%. The way that we would get higher to that 50% is when there's families on a bus. We can seat families together versus others who are not, with others getting on the bus. There will be a seating chart so that we can have the ability to just still provide social distancing on a bus. Face coverings will be required on the bus, and windows will be open as long as temperatures allow, including any hatches that can be open for ventilation too. And in addition to the seating charts that I mentioned before, we'll also have a plan in place for how we load and unload the buses, again, just to minimize the amount of students that are interacting with each other and having to cross paths while transporting to or from school. So our sample school schedules for our hybrid model, and that's the in-person instruction model, would be for at the elementary level for an arrival at 8 a.m. and then for in-person core instruction to happen in the morning before 11:45 to noon dismissal. Students would then go home, eat lunch, and begin their afternoon in a virtual classroom with their teacher before wrapping up by 2:35. For any students who are participating 100% virtually, they would still have a similar kind of schedule. It's just that at the beginning of the day, they would be logging into the computer, having a virtual interaction with a teacher and other classmates, and end their day at the same time. Likewise, at the secondary level, 8:30 is the start time for students. They would also do the core instruction in the morning before departing between 12:25 and 12:40. They would travel home, eat lunch, and finish out their day of virtual classes at home. And likewise, for anyone participating virtually, they would be logging in and just same as elementary students, interacting with their teacher and other students virtually. Our class sizes, we anticipate in the virtual academy to be run at capacity. And so what that means is between 25 or 30 students, depending on the grade level and the type of class. And it might be larger depending on the type of class, but for the most part between 25 and 30. And that all classes are happening synchronously. So what that means is that every student and teacher will have a schedule. And at that particular time, they will have a time to be logged into a class with other students and their teacher. For our hybrid instruction, we'll be operating with reduced class sizes. So at the younger grades, for example, kindergarten through second grade, it might be somewhere between 12 and 13 kids, all depending on the size of the room and how many kids we can fit in and socially distance. And at the higher grades, it might be around 15 kids or so. And likewise, it's still going to be an in-person morning and then a virtual afternoon, but there will still, for that virtual afternoon, be an assigned time for them to be logged in. They're also done in such a way too for the in-person learning that students would be staying with the same group of students for the largest extent possible of the day. We'd be creating groups of students that would be sticking together in order to minimize the exchange of students throughout the halls, and also to be able to keep groups of students together or cohorts of students throughout the day. So our in-person days and Monday through Friday, we've prioritized in this model our English language learners, any students in a self-contained special ed classroom, pre-K students, students in kindergarten through 6th grade, and also 8th and 9th grade. And that is also in an effort to reduce our numbers. So in alternating weeks, however, grades 7, 10, and 11, those students might be assigned to be either a part of an A week or B week rotation, meaning that they would come in person on an A week, for example, but be learning remotely for their B week, while the B week students are obviously exchanging with them during that time. And grade 12 is somewhere in the middle there, because depending on the student and what courses they need for graduation, they could either be an everyday, Monday through Friday, every week person, or an alternating week person, depending on their schedule and what they need. I also recognize that childcare could be an issue for several families. And so we've partnered with the Boys and Girls Club and also the YMCA to offer some childcare options for either before school, after school, or both. I also know that they're working on ways in which students can still participate, of course, in their virtual afternoon instruction while being at one of their facilities for childcare. Additional information regarding that will be posted on our website as it's firmed up. A lot of this is evolving as we work through it. And then I would also mention Bright Side Up, formerly known as the Capital District Child Care Council. They're a great resource also to be able to find affordable child care and with varying needs. So they will match up any family with child care in an effort to be able to give them what they're looking for in an area that they're looking for. Likewise, with technology and connectivity, we know that that was a struggle during our initial school closure back in March. We worked really hard to get technology in the hands of any student who needed it. We have more devices coming in, and we'll have during the first part of September another campaign of making sure that every student has a device and connectivity if they need it. So more information coming forward on that, but there is a sufficient supply available in order to be able to even swap out ones that might not be working. So more details on that to follow. So some next steps for us, we have 25 work days to implement this plan. We're amidst those 25 days right now. So we've been working on our implementation. We plan to continually engage stakeholders in addition to these Q&A sessions that we're having right now. We're also working really hard to make sure we're putting things out on our website, and in times where we're calling groups together wherever we can, we're making sure that we can have an inclusive process with both internal and external stakeholders. We launched a few weeks ago a questionnaire for families regarding what school option they wanted. That was due by August 9th. Obviously that time's passed by now, so we're in the process of sending a letter out to families confirming their choice for what they picked for either that hybrid or virtual option. We're also working with staff right now regarding accommodations and any staff that might need accommodations. We're working to finalize schedules for students and staff and anticipate that those will be available for teachers, students, and families later in August. We've really, as you can imagine, been under the wire to create much of what's needed for our reopening plan. So that's currently in progress right now. And we're also looking at some potential adjustments to the school calendar, and that'll be a finalized piece perhaps tomorrow, but presented to our board as the idea or notion that classes would not begin until September 14th. And that's so that we have 4 days up front to train and work with staff prior to students arriving back at school to make sure that we're ready for the return. And all of the necessary training has happened with staff in order to make that successful. So at this point, I do want to open it up for question and answer. So just to remind you that there is a button that you can press. I am joined, as you can see now, by Patty Pazer, who will help me by reading through the questions that are typed into the Q&A chat so that I can respond. I've got a team with her, socially distanced with her, in a large room who are also feverishly taking down all the questions and answers that we're getting, just in case you provide a question for which we don't get to you. Don't fret, we'll make sure we publish answers to all of the questions that are asked. And likewise, I also want to point out on our website is Let's Talk. We have a team of people who are also using Let's Talk and responding to the questions we receive in Let's Talk. So that's one other avenue you can use. So why don't we go ahead and start with Q&A, and we will continue with any questions we receive right up until 4 o'clock. At that point, we'll close the session and we'll publish what we've received from today's session. And there's still one more session tomorrow. If you know someone who wasn't able to make it, don't forget we are recording this, but we'll also have one last session tomorrow between 5 and 6 p.m. and the details of that are posted on our website. So Patty, what do you have for the first question, Dr. Pazer?
Could you share how many kids are registered to attend in person by building? If numbers are low in classes, are you considering moving kids to other buildings?
I think that that's a great question, and we can give some numbers. I know that some others have asked for that too. Of course, we have an idea by building of how many students are looking for in-person instruction or that hybrid model. And to answer, are we considering moving kids to other buildings? I don't want to rule that out. That's always a possibility because we have to make sure, one, that we have the right number of kids in a room and that we don't have too many kids in a room. And likewise, we want to make sure that we have enough staff to be able to cover them. So both of those are things that we're taking into account right now. But any changes regarding that would be something that we would clearly communicate, but I don't want to rule that out as a possibility.
In regards to the high school schedule, will the students be changing classrooms and will they have access to lockers?
So in the high school, we're going to be limiting the movement from classroom to classroom. And that's not to say that there aren't some kids who might need to, depending on their very unique and specific needs. But for the most part, the schedules that we're creating, they're being created under the guise that we want to limit the amount of movement throughout the buildings. And lockers are a great question. We haven't broached that topic yet, but that is something that I think we need to be talking about, the use of lockers, and especially the time to be able to use lockers, because like I said, our ability to have students moving throughout the building is going to be somewhat limited. So that's something that we're going to want to take a serious look at, given the nature of what school reopening is going to look like. So I appreciate the question about lockers, a more definitive answer to come about that, but thank you.
Will a student be able to switch from the hybrid in-person to the virtual academy before the 10-week interval is completed?
So if a student wanted to switch from the hybrid model, so that's our in-person in the morning, virtual in the afternoon, to completely virtual before the 10-week period, by all means, yes. I think our limiting it to the 10 weeks was really our concern over staffing and the ability to accommodate additional students in the in-person model. Switching out of the in-personal model is a little less difficult, but we'd want to make sure that they were able to get in and continuously learn from where they left off in the previous place. So we'd want that continuity of instruction happening. But that's a good point about the 10 weeks. We'll be asking for the most part for students to commit to and families to commit to it for 10 weeks at a time. Like I said, it's a little easier for us for those coming for the hybrid model to switch to virtual, so long as there's room and there's space and that we can accommodate that's something that we need to take into account too. But we would certainly work with families in wanting to make a change.
Will we get a school supply list?
So I know a lot of people have been asking about school supply lists. Please know that we're working on being able to get those things out. This is a little bit different of a year than we've ever seen before, but as soon as we can finalize some of those things, and again, we appreciate your patience, and as we work through this, we will make sure we get them out. But because schedules are like nothing we've ever seen before, and how we're assigning kids, our instruction might look a little bit different too. So are rethinking what those supplies might be could also play into what you have to get, but yes, those should be forthcoming as well.
How are you going to do the virtual classroom, the time and everything about it?
So students will be assigned to a virtual classroom, just like they would if they were in person, and there will be a particular time in which they'll be assigned to be in the classroom, and they'll during that time go to the link for their classroom at that time. The only difference will be is that they'll be participating virtually, so they won't physically be in a classroom with others, but they will virtually be in the same room. So they'll be participating in instruction and classwork. It'll just be happening at a remote location.
What will dismissal look like in the elementary school? Will classes be dismissed one at a time?
That's a great question. Two buildings right now, the principals are working really hard at strategic dismissal plans. And I anticipate that every building is going to look a little bit different because of how the buildings are laid out. But to give an idea, it might not even be an entire class dismissing at the same time. It might be smaller groups of students dismissing. And there could very well also be more than one door used for both arrival and dismissal, just so that we can have assigned places for students to go through, but also limiting so that there aren't groups going through, large groups going through all at the same time. So every building might look slightly different, but it will be done in a staggered sort of way in order to limit large groups.
How will attendance be handled if a student has technology issues and cannot log on at the appropriate time? What happens?
So I think that that's a good question, and we want to make sure that every kid has working technology so that they can participate, but things happen. They happen to us as adults too. We want to be flexible as possible with that, and we want to make sure that kids as well as staff had a way to be able to report most immediately that they have an issue so that we can also get it rectified. If they're using one of our devices and we need to swap it out, we'll have a plan for that to be able to happen. Or if they're not even using one of our devices, they have one of their own and that stops working, but they want to make use of the device because they're stopped working, we'll have a way for them to have access to those as well.
Will parents see a picture of their children's classrooms?
So if parents are looking to have a picture of the classroom that kids will be in once we assign schedules, I love that idea, and I think it should certainly be a part of our communication going out. We're still getting classrooms ready, as you can imagine. There's a lot to be done and a lot that happens during the course of the summer, but as we get closer to the opening of school, at the very least, we can expect to have some pictures of what buildings, classrooms in buildings look like. And if you want one of the specific classroom and it hasn't been made available as we get closer to the start of school, there's no reason why you couldn't reach out to the principal and say, hey, could you text me a picture of that classroom, Mrs. Smith's classroom? We could certainly work with you to be able to do that too.
How will specials like art class and dance be held?
So it depends. It depends on whether a student's participating in person or in our virtual option. Virtually, obviously, those will still happen remotely, but our in-person option, it could be either or. It's going to be dependent on their schedule. In some cases, students might be taking an art class virtually or a physical education class virtually, dependent on the schedule. In other cases, they might be doing it in person. If they're doing it in person, those same types of rules would apply of social distancing and face coverings. So it's going to depend on their schedule. It could be either or.
How will instrumental lessons and things like band, orchestra, and chorus be handled?
And so I would answer that really the same way. It's going to be dependent on schedules, but it could be depending on the option. It could be both. It could be either in person or virtually. And if you're virtual, obviously we would still work to be able to do that. Anything that we could do virtually for our students participating virtually, we will definitely work to be able to offer that virtually as well.
How is Votech running, and will there be buses from the high school to Votech?
So the career and technical education program, either at Capital Region BOCES or here in Schenectady at the Steinmetz Career and Leadership Academy, will still be occurring. They're still working to finalize their schedules right now too, but we will be dovetailing with them, and there will still be transportation provided so that students can still participate to the fullest extent possible.
What happens if your child gets sick in school?
So if your child gets sick in school, if it's just I'm not feeling well, I have a headache, versus presenting with COVID symptoms, we would certainly call like we would during the course of any year and ask you to be able to, if they're not able to stay in school, to pick them up. If they're presenting, however, with what appears to be or could possibly be symptoms related to COVID, we would, without a doubt, would direct you to your primary care provider or an urgent care. If you don't have a primary care provider, or don't have access to urgent care, we would work with the Schenectady County Department of Public Health to get you in touch with an agency or community partner who could help and also potentially provide testing if necessary.
What will the process be for students that are dropped off and picked up? For example, my son is in first grade and he can't just walk home by himself.
So for students who are dropped off or picked up, same as what I described before, there will be a prescript plan for both arrival and dismissal. So for each and every kid, it might look a little bit different, but there will be a designated time and pickup location just so that you can be there at that particular door or location to pick your child up. But that's going to be dependent on each school. As we get closer to the start of school, we'll be able to communicate that out a little bit more effectively.
If in-person enrollment is very low, would you consider contacting families to increase the enrollment, particularly English as a second language students who may benefit more by being at school?
So if there was a particular student or groups of students that could benefit from in-person instruction, but they've opted for something else, I wouldn't preclude us from making that call to have that conversation with a family member about that. But I wouldn't want to, the choice piece was an important part for us. We wouldn't want to jeopardize or compromise their ability to still make a choice. So if at the end of the day, they're opting for virtual instruction was their choice and what they wanted to do, I still would like to be able to work with them to be able to provide the services that they need in order to still receive the same level of instruction as if they were in person.
Will the children's schedules be sent home?
So as we move closer to the start of school, we will certainly be providing for our secondary level schedules. I don't want to commit to the fact that they're going to be sent home just yet, just because I know we're going to be operating really, really close to the deadline. It's a possibility that some students might not be receiving schedules until which time they actually come to school on the first day. I hope that that's not the case. If we are able to finalize them and have them ready, we certainly would be sending them home too. I know in the past some schools have had nights in which you could drop by to pick up schedules. I don't foresee us doing that this year as we have in some past years, but more information on schedules as they become available. at the very least for elementary levels, we'll be making sure that those assignments are sent home as well.
How are the half days going to go? And then how are snow days going to go?
So we haven't got, I know that there are some half days on our schedule, and there are also some potential snow days, but as far as the half days go, we'll need to take a look at those. There's a possibility that we might change what that looks like depending on our rolling out of this plan. So I appreciate the question about the half days. It might mean that we just operate on our regular hybrid schedule, just not have our afternoon courses. But more to come on that. We'll provide more details around the specific time for dismissal because our dismissal times aren't that far off from what a half day might look like. They're just slightly longer than a half day. And then in addition to that, the second part of the question, Patty, remind me, was about half days and snow days.
Snow days.
So snow days are a good question. I don't want to think about snow just yet, but it's an inevitable part of coming to school. It's interesting because now we're preparing all of our classes, even if you're participating in our in-person model, we're preparing everyone for the possibility of having to be remote at any point. So I would love, because we all love learning and learning is fun, to just say instead of a snow day, today is a remote day. But we've got a little bit of time to plan out for that right now. So I think there'll be more information to come around that. But maybe now with this new way of learning, snow days can be a thing of the past.
Would you describe the plans that are in place in an effort to keep children who may not be able to follow precautionary measures safe?
So I think that each and every classroom is going to have a plan in place to work not only just with students and staff, but also families too, to help us in that regard. I think it's something really important that not only are we working to enforce here at school, but also we're getting support from families at home. Because of the fact that we rely really very strongly on the fact that we need to social distance and use of PPE, we'll want to reinsure that that's happening in school too, but with the help of families. If there's a case where that isn't being followed, one of the things we'll be sending with additional information is what those guidelines look like for our in-person instruction. So it is important in order to maintain a certain level of health and safety for all of our students and staff that we follow them. And in cases where they're not, we would want to work really closely with families on that.
Will each school send parents more details about how all of this will be applied to their school?
Absolutely. I think that we all want some additional information about details. The things that I'm providing for you are really what we see as contiguous across all of our schools or the same across all of our schools. But a student schedule, for example, might look different from school to school. So each school is working right now to get those out. Likewise, I mentioned, arrival or departure at the end of the day for dismissal. Both of those might look different too, depending on the school. So those specifics would certainly be communicated out from each school as well.
Will teletherapy be available and how will it work?
So teletherapy is something for students who are participating virtually that we would want to extend. Likewise, for any of the services that we would offer, we want to, the fullest extent possible, provide those same types of services to students who are also participating virtually. How it might look, we'd want to use something that's secure and confidential so that students can participate and also make sure that we're compliant with any both technological and health standards that are required for us.
What will the virtual teaching look like for the elementary student?
So if you're participating virtually and you're choosing to be in the virtual academy, you'll still be logging in at a set time. So it's what we would call synchronous learning, which is a little bit different than what you may have seen after our initial closure in March. So last year, some of our learning happened asynchronously, meaning that you may have been doing some of it on your own, or as families might very well know, you were helping your kids with it. The difference would be is that it's just like being in a classroom, except you're logging in from home. you're still in front of a teacher and you're still with classmates. It's just that you're in a virtual space rather than a physical space. So while the techniques for instruction might look a little bit different, given the fact that it's happening in a virtual world, instruction would still be happening at real time. So I would still be in front of a teacher as a student and also be able to raise my hand, ask for help, or even get that one-on-one time that I might need.
Our district has some buildings that are older. What is the plan for air quality?
So that's a good point, because the age of our buildings, the majority of our buildings, like most schools across the state, do not necessarily have mechanical ventilation. So in those cases, we are going to be relying on natural ventilation. So in places where we don't have the ability to increase an intake of outside air mechanically, we have to rely on windows to be able to do that. And for that reason is why all of our classes that will be occupied in person will be in spaces that are exterior facing rooms with windows that can open, so that we can increase ventilation that way.
Will parents of elementary students have the opportunity to meet their child's teacher?
I know that that's an important part of school, is making sure that you can meet with teachers. And we will make sure, without a doubt, virtually is always a possibility. But for those in-person times, it would be something that we would be scheduling. We'd want to make sure that's happening on a scheduled basis. As we get closer to that time in which we have back to school nights and parent-teacher events, I would look for additional information as that unfolds, because it might again look different in location to location or even teacher from teacher, but we still want to encourage that to the fullest extent possible, even if it might look a little bit different than it has in years past.
You just mentioned this, but I'm going to ask it so you can expand a little bit. Will there be an open house?
Yeah, it might look different. I would like to say 100% without certainty we're going to have an open house, but it might not be an in-person open house. It might be a virtual open house that we're sending out to families. So the idea of we're limiting our buildings and the people accessing our buildings, it isn't because we don't want people coming in. We do indeed want them to, but because we also need to control the health and safety aspect of it, we might be inviting people to come in virtually to participate differently than we have in the past. So again, a little bit of time before those back to school nights and open houses happen, but stay tuned for what that might look like. But again, I would ask for your flexibility in recognizing that it might be very different than it has been in years past. But that's really only under the guise or idea that we want to make sure that we're keeping everyone safe.
This one's a three-part question. What will the procedures be if someone in the building tests positive for COVID? How will families be notified? And will the school close for 14 days?
So the answer really is, even though it's a three-part question, it's kind of almost a one-part answer. And I know that specifics are really important, but it depends. And it depends because every circumstance around a positive case is also very different. And in each and every one of those cases, around our school closing, around testing, all of those pieces, we'd be immediately partnering with the Schenectady County Department of Health. And in that case, they'd be working very closely with us to make sure they're contacting others. So our obligation in that is to keep very tight records on who's been entering each building, each room within a building. We'll have all of that information to immediately hand over to them so they can begin that process of notifying and contact tracing. So they would step in that regard and do that. And likewise, depending on the situation or the circumstance, it could mean that perhaps the entire classroom would need to quarantine for 14 days and not the entire building. It could be just a wing of a building or the entire building, or it could be any combination of those things. So every situation is going to be a little bit different, but then being the public health officials and being the staff that's most notably involved in public health concerns in the pandemic and can speak from that medical and scientific perspective, we're going to be relying on them to help us as educators to determine whether or not a full closure is something that we need, or if there's a way that we can modify that. At the end of the day, our goal is to keep students learning and to keep them in school. And if keeping them in school or keeping them learning has to look a little bit different given those circumstances, we are going to do what's ever in the best interest of kids.
We've heard that another district is now reopening in October. Is our plan for reopening still September?
So our plan is still for reopening for instruction on September 14th. We're going to certainly continue to listen to stakeholders, pay attention to what we're hearing that's happening in the community. And if anything were to change in that regard, we'd make sure we communicate that. But we feel confident in the plan that we have in place. It really requires all of us working together in order to ensure that it happens. And that includes us as parents, community members, or even school staff. All of us have to be working together in order for it to happen. We're going to move forward with that date in mind, and we'll continually listen to our stakeholders. And if things evolve, as you know, throughout this pandemic, things have changed on a daily basis. I don't ever want to say never that it couldn't change, but given the fact that our infection rates are where they are in New York State right now, we're not necessarily in a hot spot. It isn't something that I'm anticipating would change, but again, stay tuned in case it does. We would widely communicate that out.
How will high school and middle school orientation for new students be handled for both hybrid and remote options?
So in both of those cases, in some cases for our in-person models, those orientations might happen in the first days of school when we bring students back rather than in the summer like they may have in the past. So more information forthcoming around that. Likewise for the virtual model too. So I wouldn't anticipate us bringing students back at the end of August or in the beginning of September before classes start. We just won't be ready in our facilities yet to be able to do that, but we would have some sort of a modified format to be able to provide that. So more information to come.
I'm going to jump back a little bit. So the first day of school for the virtual student is September 14th. I thought it was September 8th.
So we are potentially going to be changing, and this isn't official yet. I apologize, I had mentioned it earlier on in the presentation, but probably should have spent a little bit more time on it. If approved tomorrow night by our Board of Education, we would be looking to change the first date of school from the 8th to the 14th. And once that's approved by the Board of Education tomorrow, if they approve it, we'll widely communicate that out. Why? Because we wanted to also move, we have 4 superintendent's conference days throughout the school year. We would be moving those 4 days to the very start of school so that they would happen on the 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th. And that's in order to make sure that all staff are trained and ready for students to come back, whether it's in the virtual model or the hybrid model. Either one, we want to make sure we're 100% ready before kids come back. But that also means that any of those dates that were on the calendar initially listed as superintendent's conference days would now be instructional days. So those dates in which we would have said, okay, there's no school today, it's a superintendent's conference day, they would come off the calendar for later in the year because we'd be front loading them in the first part of the school year.
How are we going to do graduation for students who are in the virtual academy?
So I would love to say that I have a plan for graduation right now. I hope that we're in a different place by the time we get to graduation, and that we can have what we would consider to be a more regular or normal graduation than we had this year. That's my hope. We haven't started planning for graduation yet, but the thing I can assure you is, regardless of whether you're participating virtually or in the hybrid model, our plan is still to make sure that students can accrue the credits that they need in order to be able to graduate, and that they'll still, as long as they complete the coursework that's provided to them, that they would still be able to receive their diploma. How they receive their diploma and the celebrations that we do around that, that's still to be determined. I'm going to still keep my fingers crossed and say my prayers for that in-person graduation that we've all been accustomed to, but it's too soon to say what that might look like as far as next June. But more information as we get closer, without a doubt.
What if your child is in the hybrid learning and not feeling well? Can they do online learning that day?
So that's a great question. And I think that as we get further along into the school year, that might be more of a possibility. It might be more difficult for students to be able to do that in the very beginning because things that are happening in our in-person model during the day, so if they're participating in their core instruction in class, it's not going to be broadcast out so that students can just hop on and participate as if they were there. As we get a little bit better at this, that could be an option. It isn't something that I see us having available right out of the gate. They also couldn't necessarily just jump into another class that's happening virtually, because even though we have grade levels that will be happening virtually, what's happening in one class might be very different from what's happening in their class. We also want to make sure that they're getting into a classroom with other students and a teacher that knows them and has a relationship with them and can also provide them a level of instruction that they need that's best suited for them. So might not be available right out of the gate. As we get better, perhaps.
Will parents be sent online login information for virtual learning prior to the first day of school to make sure that their child can log on without any issues?
We will make sure prior to the first day of school that we are sending out that information for students so families can do a test and can make sure that all those things are working before we go live on that first day of school.
Will the classroom teacher be the same for the hybrid in the morning and then in the afternoon for that child in the virtual classroom?
Yeah, so I think it's a little bit easier to answer that more at the elementary level, because the answer there is yes. There could be some other courses that perhaps they're doing virtually that could involve a different teacher for the afternoon, but they'd still finish out their day with their regular classroom teacher that they were in person with in the morning. For students who are at the secondary level, that might be a little bit different though, because in that virtual model, we have the ability to do more of a switching of classes because it's happening virtually. So there is a good chance in our virtual world at the secondary level for sure that students could be in a different teacher with a different teacher in a different class than they were when they started out at the beginning of the day.
There are no more questions.
Wow, that's great. Well, I appreciate everyone's time. Like I mentioned before, we are going to be posting all of this so that you have access to the recording for this. We have one more session tomorrow from 5 to 6 p.m. The link is available on our website. And as things evolve, we'll continually provide updates on our website and through all of those other avenues, social media and emails, just so that people have access to them as they come about. In the meantime, I hope everyone has a great rest of their day. I will be reporting things out as they become available, but I'm really looking forward to seeing everyone on September 14th. Have a great day.